Torah's never in my way. Yesimech Elohim Kesara, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Every Friday night, we bless our daughters with these words. May God make you like Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. To understand where we come from, we must start from the very beginning with our oldest matriarch. What does it mean to be made like Sarah? Through commentary and midrash, the ancient rabbis paint a picture of our founding matriarch as an exemplary role model. First, they emphasize the single positive attribute explicitly given to Sarah in the Torah, that she is Yefat Mar'eh, Yafa hi me'od, exceedingly, doubly beautiful. Her beauty is so important to the rabbis that they talk about it over and over again. Bereshit Rabbah tells us that for the 90 years she was barren, Sarah was as beautiful as the bride under her chuppah. In Bava Batra, the rabbis go as far as to say that compared to Sarah, all other people are like monkeys. They teach that God personally attests to Sarah's prophetic status by saying to Abraham, whatever Sarah tells you, do as she says. And finally, the rabbis describe Sarah as a pious woman, free of sexual impurity. Several commentators, including Ibn Ezra, agree that God stops Pharaoh from sexually assaulting Sarai by inflicting him and his people with plagues before it is too late. Now, as much as I'd like to believe this rabbinic portrait of Sarah, I am haunted by the pshat of the text. The most commonly used words in the Torah associated with Sarah after fertility and birth are given, taken, and returned. Given her lack of agency, I am disturbed by the rabbis prettifying and idealizing her story. Yes, Sarah is so beautiful, but this positive attribute is almost always used against her. In the modern Perush titled Ra'iti Isha Rabat Yofi, Galia Riban Sadan says that Sarah's beauty is like a kadur shel esh, a ball of fire, mushach me'od me'ayem me'od, very attractive, very threatening. Her beauty threatens Abraham's life in both Egypt and Gerar, which repeatedly puts her at risk of physical and psychological abuse. Simply put, Sarah's beauty does not empower her, as the rabbis would like us to think. It places her at its mercy. And yes, Sarah speaks to God, but what does God do in their one micro-conversation? Shuts down her laughter and reprimands her for lying, and she is terrified, while Abraham gets to experience the yirah of religious awe. Sarah is subjected to the yirah of abject fear, rebuked by a God whom she has just spoken to for the very first time. And yes, the rabbis try to protect Sarah's modesty and status by claiming that Pharaoh did not assault her. But the text tells us two things that make me believe he did. First, that Pharaoh says he took her as his wife. Va'ekach ota li leisha. Second, that God prevents Avimelech, the king of Gerar, from touching her explicitly. And it says, V'Avimelech lo karav eleha. If we know that Avimelech did not go near Sarah, why wouldn't the text be just as clear about Pharaoh? By portraying Sarah as sexually unblemished, the rabbis stigmatize victims of sexual assault. Sarah is so much more than the attractive, pious, sexually pure figures described by the rabbis. She is real, and her story is complex. In his senior sermon, Ben Lux Morgan noted the connection between our foremother Sarah and her grandson Jacob when the Ish renames him Yisrael. Jacob is blessed, ki sarita im Elohim v'im anashim vatuchal, for you have striven with beings divine and human and have prevailed. Ki sarita, from the root Sarah. Sarah is rooted in his struggle and in his name. I suggest that because Yisrael was named for Sarah, we, B'nai Yisrael, are all named for Sarah. And that if he is blessed for his struggle, she should be blessed for hers too. To find the blessing in Sarah's struggle, we need to look again at her story and acknowledge what the rabbis don't: Sarah's trauma and how it echoes throughout her life. We can start by looking once again at her name. When we first meet our matriarch, her name is Sarai, which is commonly translated as my princess. And Rashi interprets this as God's princess. But I think it more likely means her father's princess, the man who named her. And when she's passed off to Avram, she becomes his princess. And when she's taken by Pharaoh, she literally becomes his princess. By calling her God's princess, Rashi glosses over the fact that Sarai is repeatedly beloved, desired, and owned by men. But Sarah also means a female officer, and, as previously noted, a struggler. As princess, she is the noble woman constrained by her public role. As the officer, she has agency, but misuses her power. As the struggler, she wrestles with her past to try and secure a better future. As life presents her with both hardships and blessings, Sarah responds with these aspects of her identity. After Sarai is assaulted by Pharaoh and his sarim, his officers in Mitzrayim, Sarai, the princess of a burgeoning nation, can only share so much of herself with her people. She suppresses her trauma rather than processing it by speaking her truth. Indeed, we don't hear from her again until 4 chapters later, when we read, Sarai, Avram's wife, had borne him no children. She had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. Commentators suggest that Hagar is the daughter of Pharaoh, gifted to Sarai as compensation for his abuse. How painful it must be then for Sarai to be served daily by a woman herself traded into servitude who resembles her former abuser. Hagar represents Sarah's fear of her past, her sense of unworthiness, and her capacity for cruelty. just as Jacob wrestles an Ish who embodies his trauma, Sarai, Jacob's predecessor, wrestles an Isha, Hagar. Determined to overcome her trauma, Sarai, the struggler, takes a leap of faith by entrusting Hagar with her husband. She reassures herself, Ulai ibaneh mimena, perhaps I can be built up through her. Sarai not only hopes to be built up through her progeny, but also mimena, from Hagar herself. She seems to be saying, maybe this Mitzrit, this Egyptian woman I have come to trust, can help me heal. Maybe, despite the tension between us, we can still build a great nation. But when Hagar realizes that she's pregnant, she shows disdain towards her barren mistress, triggering Sarai's greatest insecurity. Once again, Sarai has been betrayed by an Egyptian. In her trauma response, Sarai becomes the officer by imposing hard labor upon Hagar. Ironically, her cruelty echoes the men who abused her and foreshadows the oppression of the Israelites by the Sarei Misim, the taskmasters in Egypt. She is at once the abused and the abuser, the oppressed and the oppressor. A traumatized person responds to their trauma in myriad ways. At times, Sarai acts from the Meitzar, the narrow place, by lashing out. And at other times, she acts from the Merchav, the expansive place, by opening her heart to her community. We see her emerging from the narrow place when God blesses her with a new name. No longer is she Sarai, my princess, but Sarah, princess over all. In her blessing, she also learns that she will have a son, Yitzchak, whom God names for Abraham's laughter, but at Isaac's bris, she claims to have named Isaac for her own laughter. So this woman has some chutzpah. Sarah, princess over all, announces to her people, God brought me laughter. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. Despite her trauma, she finds joy and humor in life and shares them with others. She finally feels as if she tuchal, as if she has prevailed. And now, Sarah no longer needs Ishmael as a safeguard against her barrenness. In the years that follow, I imagine Sarah struggling as she watches Ishmael become an Egyptian man. The more he develops, the more she perceives him as a threat. So when she witnesses a teenage Ishmael metzacheking with Yitzchak, she sees him, as Lori Lefkowitz teaches, Isaacing Isaac, threatening to eclipse him. Rather than trying to reconcile with Hagar and Ishmael, she banishes them to the wilderness in a misguided attempt to protect both herself and her son. Once again, she is the officer, subservient to her trauma, more reactive than reflective. What can we make of this matriarch whose actions are often destructive? When we pray for our daughters to walk in Sarah's footsteps, what are we really praying for? As the rabbis have shown, it can be tempting to overlook the trauma in favor of exemplary role models. But Sarah stands as a real model for how we might behave when the struggle bests us. Our blessing, our duty, is to keep sara'ing with Sarah, by confronting our pain so that we can grow from it. Today, as the war in Israel, Lebanon, and Gaza rages on, as the political atmosphere in the US intensifies, as anti-Semitic attacks escalate around the world, we can look at Sarah and the modern figures who embody her to find the blessing in our own struggles. Rachel Goldberg Poland, whose son Hirsch was murdered by Hamas after almost a year in captivity, embodies the best of our matriarch. Despite her agony and the enormous pressure she faced as a public figure, Rachel fought to liberate her son while consoling the entire Jewish world. In an interview, she confessed that her mission required the suppression of so much terror and trauma just waiting to be opened and unpacked. But in her grief, Rachel still expresses gratitude to God for being Hirsch's mama, and from her struggle shows compassion for all mothers. Even with their varied responses to trauma, Rachel and Sarah teach us about the ways we choose to lead in times of fear and how that fear impacts our decisions. We are never just one thing, never just the princess, the officer, or the struggler. We all have parts of ourselves that conflict with one another. Ultimately, how we negotiate these identities will determine the strength of our character and the beauty of our struggle. Sometimes we will act from the Meitzar, like when we lash out at a family member over politics at Thanksgiving, or even worse, when we dehumanize people. But at other times, we will find the strength to respond from the Merchav, like when we take a chance at reestablishing trust or create joy, even in the darkness. In all of it, the struggle is our blessing. We pray to be like Sarah Imeinu, ki sarim anachnu im Elohim ve'im anashim. God, make us like Sarah, Yisimenu Elohim kesara, who wrestles with you, with people, and with herself in pursuit of a more noble legacy.
In the presence of our Sefer Torah,